Awesome. Good afternoon. My name is Laura Birchfield, and I am the Research and Graduate Education Outreach Coordinator with the Graduate School and the Office of Research and Creative Activity at WKU. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this afternoon for the Spring 2022 GRE Strategy Workshop. I'm joined by Ms. Catherine Schultz and Mr. Matthew Bashikad-Lubowski from the Educational Testing Service. Dr. Ranjit Kudali and I greatly appreciate working with them to offer this free workshop for WKU students where they'll help you provide information for your GRE. So without further ado, I'll pass things along to Catherine and Matthew.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. We are going to take the next hour and a half and walk through the GRE General Test and services. We are going to allow for a Q&A, but we're going to wait till the end to do that. So if you could just jot your questions down as they come to you, then we can address them at the end. This is what we have on the agenda here today. We're going to start with just the nuts and bolts of how to register for the GRE General Test. We'll give you an overview of what to expect on the GRE, as well as some tips and strategies. And then we'll take you through what to expect on test day so you can be the most prepared. And then once you complete your test, how do you get and send your scores to institutions? And then also just how can you prepare? We'll talk about some tools that are out there, as well as some tools to help you stand out in this whole process, and also some GRE resources. The GRE General Test is actually accepted around the world across a number of programs, from master's to doctoral programs, MBAs to law programs. There was a recent announcement from the ABA, and all JD programs now are accepting the GRE. It's also used for awarding fellowships. And the great thing about the GRE scores is that they are valid for 5 years. You can take the GRE at a testing center, or we now have a new at-home option. For the testing center on the left, the box on the left, it's available throughout the year continuously at the test centers. There are over 1,000 different test centers across the world in 160 countries. When you take the test at a test center, it is delivered on a computer, on a desktop computer with a full screen monitor. You'll have a mouse as well as a keyboard. To find where testing locations are, you can go to the link here on this screen. And we will be sharing the PowerPoint, and the graduate office will be posting it along with the recording as well. We also have this new option to take the GRE at home. And just so you know, it's exactly the same as far as the content, the format, and your experience through taking the GRE. So you don't have to adapt the way you're preparing or studying for the test. It also has the exact same score scales and reporting. So it's just all the same. It's just a different location. So instead of a test center, you're testing at home. It's the same fee. You pay the same, including the vouchers. The main difference beyond just the location is that when you take it at home, you are still monitored by a proctor throughout your whole testing experience, and your testing session is recorded. And there is artificial intelligence technology in addition to the live proctors. But it's a great new addition and way to take the GRE. We're going to start with talking about some registration tips, because that's actually the very first step before you can even take the GRE. You do need to create an ETS account to register for the GRE. Make sure you have your ID with you when you register, because you will need that. And just this may seem particular, but you actually really must exactly match your name as it is on your ID. So it has to be exactly the same. Like I can't put Kathy, I need to put Catherine because that's what it's on my driver's license. Can't use a nickname, and you must use your entire last name. So in my colleague's case, his last name is Bashi Kadlabowski, and so he has to put his full name too. We wanted to show you an example of what it would look like for you when you go in to create your account. This is the example of your name. So your first name, middle initial, and last name. And so we did provide this as an example, Fernandez de Cordova. So you could see how you need to put your whole given name. This is the account screen when, yeah.
Just if I could point out, if you notice on Fernandez de Cordova, there is an accent over the O, and our system does not recognize accents. So if you are a student or test taker and have an accent with your name, please omit that from the registration process. And our test center administrators are aware of that, so you will not be penalized. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Matt. And so here is an example of the whole first screen that you'll experience. So after you enter your name, like we showed on the previous screen, you'll enter your date of birth, your gender, your email address, and then your country, your address, city, and postal code. And again, all of this needs to match your documentation as well. And anything with the asterisk is what you need and are required to complete. Okay. So then once you do that and you finalize your ETS account, then you can actually now register for the GRE. You can select a test day. And then you really want to make sure you're basing your testing day on the earliest admission deadline for the institutions that you're interested, those schools that you're going to apply to. So make sure you look at what those deadlines are, and then you back it out from there. At that time, when you register, you can actually sign up for something called the GRE search service. We're going to get into that a little bit later, so we won't dive into that right now. But it is something that you will see on that first screen. Okay. We always like to say the earlier you register, the more likely you are to get the times and dates that you want. So just set up your account and take a look. One other note here is before you register, there are a lot of resources on the ETS website, and you should really take a look at that GRE information bulletin. It goes through all the ID requirements and policies, and will probably answer a lot of the questions you might have. Also, if you require any testing accommodations, you want to be sure to do that also, and you need to do that and have it approved in advance of registering for your test day. We also want to point out that there is a fee reduction program. So if there are individuals that can demonstrate financial need, or who are unemployed, or also if you're a student from an underrepresented population or a first-generation college student, take a look at the fee reduction program and see if you qualify. And what it allows you is that you can get a voucher that will pay for a part of the test. Oh, in addition to the voucher on the test, to reduce the cost of the test, you will also get free materials to some prep materials, and that is also valued at about $100. This is really important. because you don't want to find yourself on test day not being able to meet the system requirements. And so we've listed the system requirements here, but you're going to want to take some time and make sure that you go through them as well. As far as your computer requirements, you cannot use a tablet or a Chromebook or like your mobile device. So it has to be a desktop or laptop. And the operating system is also important. It has to be a licensed version of the operating system, so Windows or the Mac operating system. You are going to want to use Chrome or Firefox for your browser. And this is really important. You cannot use multiple monitors. So I actually have a dual monitor set up here. And when I took my at-home test, I had to unplug and go into the other room. So just be aware of that, no dual monitors. And then for microphone and speaker requirements, it can be an internal or external microphone and or internal and external speaker, but you cannot use a headset or earphones or AirPods when you're taking the test. Just be aware of that. And then, like I mentioned, you will have a live proctor, and so it's required that you have a camera, and it can be built in or it can be a separate webcam, but you will need to show the proctor a whole 360-degree view of your room, and that's going to include your table, top surface, as well as underneath. So just be aware of that as well. All right, now that we've gotten through the logistics and registering and getting set to take the test, let's take a look at the GRE test. The general test is comprised of 3 measures. They're listed here: analytical writing, verbal reasoning, and quantitative reasoning. So let's start with the analytical writing section. So the first section you will see is the analytical writing section. This section really is going to assess your critical thinking and your analytical writing skills through 2 timed tasks. And those tasks are below: analyze an issue and analyze an argument. And so in the analyze an issue task, you are going to be required to analyze a specific issue. You're going to want to develop your own argument. You're going to want to give your reasons and examples to support your position. And then the other is to analyze an argument. And so that is going to require you to take a look at the argument, assess the soundness, is it logical, and then give an argument according to the task directions. When you are writing your responses, you will have access to like the basic functions like inserting or deleting text, cutting and pasting. You can also undo the previous section, but there's no grammar check or spell check, so be aware of that. We always like to give some tips and strategies for each of the sections. So as we go through this, you will see some of the tips and strategies. For the analytical writing section, really review the scoring guides for each of those tasks so you really get an understanding of how the readers are going to evaluate these essays, and also the components or elements that they're looking for in your essay. It's a really good idea for you to practice your writing under timed conditions, because you think, oh, I'm a great writer, I can do this. But when you have kind of a time box around you, it is a different challenge. So be sure to practice doing that under those time conditions. It's also critical to pay close attention to the directions, so the specific task directions, and make sure that your responses are actually addressing those specific instructions. It's always good practice whenever you're writing anything really to prepare an outline. So you will have the opportunity to use scratch paper, depending on where you are, whether you're in a testing center at home, you will be able to draft out your outline. So taking a look at the issue task, you should think about supporting your position with reasons and examples drawn from your own reading, but also from your own experience and observation and or your academic studies. So that's something you really want to think about when you're doing the analytical writing area, because we do have another opportunity for you to actually just use what is in the actual essay. So in this area, you can draw upon your own observations and experiences. Once you're finished with your tasks, you want to leave some extra time at the end just so you can kind of proofread what you've done, make any revisions that you want, and then also just double check for errors. You do want to avoid any excessive kind of humor or irony in your essay responses, because it could be misinterpreted by the readers. So now Matt's going to take us through the verbal reasoning section. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Catherine. Okay, so now let's take a look at the verbal reasoning measure. Next slide. So what is verbal reasoning? Well, verbal reasoning assesses your ability to understand what you read and then how you apply those reasoning skills. You're going to encounter three different types of questions, and they are reading comprehension, where you will have to basically select your particular answer in a multiple choice question. Select in passage, where we actually be given a reading passage, and one of the lines of the passage is actually the answer to the question. So to answer the question, you would just click on that particular sentence. If you want to change your answer, you would just click on an alternate sentence. You're also going to experience text completion, where you're going to need to fill in the blank or blanks. And lastly, sentence equivalence, where you're going to have to create two sentences that are alike in meaning by selecting two items from the list of 6 choices. Next slide. So let's look at verbal reasoning tips and strategies. So we really suggest that you read the entire passage to get an overall sense before answering any question that pertains to them. Answer strictly on the basis of what the passage actually says, and do not rely on outside knowledge. After choosing the answer choice for the questions that contain blanks, we strongly suggest that you reread the sentence to make sure it makes sense. And if you can, fill in the sentence or the blanks, with your own words to find answer choices that may closely match. And of course, identify words or phrases that seem particularly significant. Next slide. So GRE reading comprehension questions will assess a test taker's ability to identify a passage's purpose and main idea, to recognize specific points made in that particular passage, to recognize assumptions underlying a passage's argument, draw inferences and conclusions based on a passage, and lastly, to evaluate a passage's logic and rhetoric. And in order to support your questions that assess these skills, a GRE reading comprehension passage has to be logically and rhetorically complex. It cannot merely be a collection of facts or assertions. Next slide. So we are always asked, where can I find GRE level reading materials? Well, I can clearly tell you it's not in People magazine or in any other periodicals that you'd probably find at a newsstand. However, you need to look for materials that present an argument that's supported by reasoning and or evidence. And a variety of places that you can find such materials are specialized academic journals, feature articles in newspapers and periodicals such as the New York Times, The Economist, Scientific American, or the London Review of Books, and also trade books by experts and journalists for general audiences. Again, popular periodicals generally do not, and textbooks also, do not demonstrate the kind of complexity that you're going to find in GRE reading passages. Okay, next. Next, let's take a look at quantitative reasoning. So quantitative reasoning is going to assess your ability to interpret and analyze quantitative information, and you're also going to be solving mathematical problems using mathematical models. You're going to encounter a variety of question types, such as quantitative comparison, multiple choice, and numeric entry, where you'll be simply provided with a text box and you need to go into that text box and type in your answer. You will be provided with the use of an on-screen calculator during the quantitative section. And as you can see, it is on screen. So we encourage you to get familiar with that calculator prior to going into the test center. And Catherine's going to talk about the resources that we have later in this session. So we're also always asked for quantitative reasoning, what math skills and concepts do I need? Well, essentially, it's elementary mathematical concepts, which include arithmetic, algebra, geometry, and data analysis. Again, that's arithmetic, algebra, geometry, and data analysis. Next slide. So when we talk about the GRE General Test, we actually term it as a test taker friendly test or a test taker friendly design. And what we mean by that is, unlike other, let's say, standardized tests or most standardized tests, the GRE General Test was designed to enable you to approach this test like you would, let's say, in a normal classroom environment and use your own personal test taking strategies. So with that said, let's say, using myself as an example, I'm a test taker that likes to go through the test questions in its entirety and answer the questions that I know, and then come back to the ones I don't know. I can apply that same concept or strategy when I take the GRE General Test. So I can move backwards and forwards freely within a section. I can change answers. I can actually mark questions for review in case, let's say, I make an educated guess and I'm not sure of that, or if I should happen to leave a question blank, or let's say partially answered, I can mark that and again come back. We also have the review screen, which will enable you to make sure that you've answered all the questions and you haven't left any marked or blank questions. And also, again, as I mentioned earlier, you have the opportunity to use the on-screen calculator. Please note that the calculator is not required to answer the questions. It's really there, or all the questions, it's really there more as a resource. So feel free to use that when necessary. As you see from the question in front of you, always read the question. In this particular example, you'll see that it's underlined nearest whole percent. Well, if you were to transfer the 0.333 onto that particular text box, that answer would actually be incorrect because it's asking you for the nearest whole percent. So in this particular example, you would essentially click in the text box and type 33. Next slide. Okay, so quantitative reasoning tips and strategies. Please note that geometric figures may not be drawn to scale, so do not try to estimate sizes by sight or measuring such figures. If applicable, as Catherine mentioned, you will have scratch paper, so you can draw your own diagrams or figures or make a list to help you sort out what the question is actually asking. When appropriate, you can avoid actually lengthy calculations by rounding up numbers before computing an estimate, or by looking for comparisons and by also recognizing continual numerical patterns. Of course, you can evaluate your progress and switch to a different strategy if you should get stuck on a particular solution, which seems to require an inordinate amount of time. Because remember, within the section, all questions contribute equally to that particular score. So if you're stuck, let's say, on questions number 1 and 2, just skip it and go on to number 3 because they each have, let's say, equal weighting. After arriving at an answer, reread the question to make sure your answer is reasonable given what is asked. And again, review the additional problem-solving strategies that are listed on our website. And again, we'll have a copy of this presentation. Next slide. Just as a reminder, if you should have any questions up until now, please enter them in the chat, and both Catherine and I will be more than happy to answer them at the end of today's session. So the test itself is what's called section level adaptive. And what that actually means is, let's say the majority of standardized tests that are on the market are adaptive by question. What that means is you can't you can't skip around, so you need to answer the question in front of you before moving forward. And as I pointed out, the nice feature about the GRE General Test is it has a test taker-friendly design. With that said, it's actually not adaptive by question, but it's adaptive by section. So what that means is the computer is going to select the second section of a measure based on, if we can go back.
Sorry about that.
It's okay, of a measure based on how well you perform on the first section. So what that means is how well you perform on your first verbal and your first quantitative section is going to determine the difficulty level of the next verbal and the next quantitative section that you have. Again, as I mentioned, within each section, all questions contribute equally to your final score. But also remember that both sections of verbal and both sections of quantitative are important, since the final score on each of the measures is based on the total number of correct answers in conjunction with the difficulty level of the questions. And we're always asked, does ETS or does, am I going to lose points for guessing or making a wrong answer? And the answer is no. So if you're given a selection and you do not know the answer, please feel free to make an educated guess, and you'll be again, at least you have. At least you have.
It just wants to advance to that next slide.
I know. For some reason, I think it has the automated feature on because I had the same problem the other week. Okay, so again, it's always better to guess than leave an answer blank. Let's say if you have a question and you have 4 possible answer choices and you don't know the answer, making an educated guess is at least giving you a 25% chance of getting that particular question correct. Okay, next slide.
Now we get to the next slide.
All right. So this slide is really just showing you how section level adaptation works. So as you can see, to the left, we have easier questions at the bottom, more difficult questions at the top. Section 1, as I mentioned, for both verbal and quant, you're going to get moderately challenging content, which means you're going to get, basically questions that are in the middle. So they're not the easiest, they're not the most difficult. How well you perform on your first verbal and your first quant section will determine the difficulty level of the next verbal and the next quant section. However, just because, let's say in this example, or looking at this example, let's say if you were to get a less well performed, because you performed less well, let's say you get less challenging content in section 2, that doesn't mean you're going to get a low score. If you look at the arrows, you can still shoot towards the middle range of the score scale. Just like, for example, if you were to get a more challenging content, it's let's say you don't perform as well on the second section that's more challenging. Again, it doesn't mean you're going to cap out at the end of the score scale. So this just gives you an idea of how section level adaptation works. Next slide. And I think Catherine's taken over from this point.
Yeah, so now we're going to walk you through kind of the structure and the format of the test so you can become familiar with what to expect. As I mentioned earlier, that first measure you'll always encounter is the analytical writing section. And it is comprised of one section with 2 timed essay tasks. And you will have 30 minutes to write an essay response for each of those 2 tasks. So that's a total of 60 minutes for that first analytical writing section. Both the verbal reasoning and the quantitative reasoning measures are comprised of 2 sections. These sections can actually appear in any order after the analytical writing section. Each verbal reasoning section contains 20 questions, and you'll have 30 minutes to complete each section. And then each quantitative reasoning section contains 20 questions, and you'll have about 35 minutes to complete each section. You will also receive either an unscored section or what is called a research section. And you will not know if the section you're working on is an unscored section, so you should do your best on all the sections that are presented to you. If you do happen to get a research section, it will be clearly identified, and it will always be the last section of the test. So whether you receive an unscored section or a research section, your answer to those questions will not count towards your score. In total, the GRE General Test is approximately 3 hours and 45 minutes in length, plus your timed breaks. Now, Matt talked a little bit about the review screen, and this review screen is available throughout your test and allows you to actually view the status of your test questions and based on the section you are in. So you can see that the table here, it's split, but the table reviews, it tells you the question number, whether you have answered the question, and then also whether you marked the question for review. So the ones with the check marks, you've marked to go back and take a look at. So don't forget to review the ones that you wanted to go back and look at. Note that a status that is marked incomplete means that you selected more or fewer responses than the question actually requires. So be sure to go back to those ones that are marked incomplete as well. All right. Now, we talked about these 3 sections, and these are the three scores that are reported on the general test. And so for the analytical writing, you have points from 0 to 6, and those can actually be in half-point increments. And then for verbal and quantitative reasoning, it's 130 to 170, and those are in full 1-point increments. And we mentioned earlier that the scores are good for 5 years. So if you're not sure when you are going to be applying, just know that your scores will be good for 5 years. So Matt and I gave you some tips and strategies as we were in the specific section, but we also want to provide some important test taking tips just overall. So let's just start with some of the basic general strategies. It's important to become familiar with the question formats and the directions before test day, so you don't have to spend additional time during your test day trying to figure things out. Also be aware of your time, but you don't want to rush, but just be aware, and that will help you kind of keep the right pace. A section clock does appear on the screen, so you know how much time you have left during that section. However, if that clock kind of ticking away gives you a little bit of a challenge and you don't like it, you can hide the clock. However, during the last 5 minutes of this section, the clock will appear to let you know that, hey, you better start wrapping things up. Also, make sure you understand what each question is asking before you answer. And remember that Matt gave you that tip that you do not get credit for answers that are partially correct. So make sure to complete them completely. And Matt also mentioned there are no points subtracted for incorrect answers. So your best strategy really is to answer all the questions in the section, even if you have to guess. This will help you to get your best score. Also use your knowledge to work through and figure out answers to those unfamiliar questions. I know Matt covered this a little bit too, but just you don't want to waste time on questions you find really difficult or challenging, because no question has more weight than the other. So you can just mark it and go back to it, but and at least guess, take a good guess. Also, you don't want to analyze your review screen. It's just a tool there to help you, and you don't want to take away valuable time from your test taking experience and questions. But do check the review screen before finishing, just to make sure that you have all the sections completely answered. All right, Matt, why don't you take us through what to expect on test day?
All right, next slide. Okay, so you need to have, and this is regardless if you're testing in a physical test center or taking the at-home test, you must have your ID with you, with your name, your signature, your photograph, and of course, ID requirements are strictly enforced. You can get the ID requirements not only in the GRE information bulletin, but also through your My ETS account and also on the ETS website. Please remember, personal items are not allowed and cannot be accessed during the break except for food, beverages, or medication. So in the testing center, you cannot have any phones, tablets, wearable technology, watches, any other electronic recording, listing, scanning, or photographic devices. You may not access your phone during the test or during the breaks to check messages or even to check the time. For at-home testing, you're going to be asked to either have a small personal mirror or a mobile phone, because you're going to need to show the proctor your screen during the check-in process. You're also going to need to show the proctor a 360-degree view of your room, and that also includes your desk and tabletop surface. Please note that due to COVID-19, you also should check the local test center policies, because you may need to show either proof of vaccination or they may be requiring you to wear a mask. Also in the test centers, or physical test centers, we do provide wipes and various things that you can wipe down your equipment if you feel necessary, but we are increasing our measures to make sure that we're providing you with a safe and reliable testing environment. Next slide. So as I mentioned, you need to have your ID and a mirror or a mobile phone. If you are in a physical test center, you're going to be provided with scrap paper and a writing utensil. However, if you're taking the at-home test, you have two options for note-taking. You can either purchase a very small whiteboard with an erasable marker, and I know I've seen these in the dollar store for literally $1, or now $1.25, and due to inflation. Oh, if we go back,
Sorry,
that's okay. Or you can purchase a transparent sheet protector. You probably have one laying around, and simply insert a blank piece of paper into the transparent sheet protector as shown on the screen. And again, you can write on that with an erasable marker and just use a tissue or a napkin to erase. The important thing is whatever notes you take, you need to erase them in view of the proctor. And if you're in a physical test center, the test center administrator and/or proctors will walk around and collect that prior to the end of the exam. Okay, so at a physical test center, your photograph will be taken, and they're also going to collect a sample of your handwriting. We used to require cursive, but now it is a printed sample. You're also going to be possibly asked to empty out your pockets, raise your pant legs above your ankles, pull up your sleeves above your wrists for visual inspection. And of course, just like at a concert hall, you may be scanned with a metal detector or wand. You also may be asked to remove your glasses for a close visual inspection to make sure they're not Google glasses or smart glasses, and also possible visual inspections of your clothing, footwear, and also your ID documents will also be conducted. Again, this is all for security purposes because this is high stakes testing. These inspections will not only occur during the check-in process, but also possibly from when you return from your break. The testing room will also not only have proctors, as I mentioned, but also possibly have electronic surveillance. Next slide. So if you're doing at-home testing, it's a little bit different. You're going to need what's called to do a final systems check. And what that is to make sure that you do not have any unauthorized software that is open and anything else running at that particular time during the exam. You're going to need to close all your browsers to make sure any applications that are not needed for the test. And essentially that's to help prevent bandwidth issues while you test. You should also make sure that other devices in your home are not using the internet if possible, because again, you don't want to have any technology issues when you test. And when you are ready for test, you're going to have to start the test with the link that you're provided in your either confirmation email, or you can go into your ETS account and go into that particular link as well. Please note, if you are more than 12 minutes late, your test will be canceled and you will not be provided with a refund. So it's really important that you arrive on time. Next slide. Okay, with at-home testing, very important. If you need to speak to the proctor or get their attention, you can use something that's called the Log Me In chat. Now, please note when you're using it, it may take about 30 to 60 seconds for the proctor to respond. And you'll know that the proctor is trying to talk to you or speak with you or communicate with you when you see a little blue owl that's going to bounce up and down on your screen. Before, again, as I mentioned, you end the session, you're going to be asked to erase any notes in view of the proctor. And of course, if you encounter any technical issues and you cannot communicate with the proctor, simply call the number that you see in front of you. And that, of course, is in the US, and you can speak to Proctor you directly. Should it be a technical issue, you will be, again, rescheduled for an alternate date, of course, at no cost or no charge. Next slide. So again, really important for at-home testing, make sure the proctor can always see you. Make sure you do not do anything that looks suspicious, like talking out loud, looking away from the screen. Again, the test is monitored through artificial intelligence technology, again, in conjunction with a live proctor. And that's not only through the test, but also when you return after your break. Also in the beginning of the test, and again, throughout the test, and when you return for your break, the system is going to make sure that the person that's seated in front of the computer is the same person that is on that identification documentation that you brought in when you entered the testing center or for the at-home test. So again, at the test center, if at any time you have a problem with your computer, really simple, just raise your hand and a test center administrator will come over to speak with you. Remember, the testing at the testing center, the premises are being recorded. Now, please note there is an optional 10-minute break after the third section of the exam, and there are 1-minute breaks between the remaining sections of the test. These breaks cannot be exceeded. Next slide. So let's move on to getting and setting your scores. And as I mentioned, if you have any questions with any of the material that Catherine and I have covered to date, please just type them in the chat and we'll be more than happy to respond at the end of the session. So let's look at getting your unofficial scores at the end of the test. So at the test center, you're going to be asked, do you want to cancel your scores permanently? Years ago, there used to be something called a permanent record, and it would follow you around for about 5 years. In that particular situation, a lot of students or test takers, when they felt they didn't do well, would cancel their test so that their, let's say, poor performance would not follow them around, and basically that information would not be shared with institutions. Well, about 10 years ago, that changed. However, that question is still there. The only time you probably would want to cancel your scores is, let's say, if you didn't complete the test, maybe you left the test center because you were ill, maybe something happened, whatever the reason or rationale, something out of the ordinary, then of course you would cancel your scores. But in most cases, I would say like 99% of the cases, you would not cancel your scores and you would move forward. Once you move forward, you are going to see your unofficial verbal and your unofficial quantitative scores. You will not see your analytical writing because it's scored by both a human in conjunction with an automated scoring engine. Thank you. If you choose to report your scores, again, you're going to see both the unofficial scores, and they're pretty accurate. If they should change, they may change by a point in either direction, but usually they are the scores that you will receive when you get your official copies. Analytical writing, you're going to see when the official test scores come out in about 10 to 15 days. And again, it's because it's scored by both a human and an automated scoring engine. Okay, next slide. So this is an example of what you would actually see at a test center. As you could see, this particular test taker scored a 161 in verbal reasoning and received an unofficial quantitative reasoning score of a 160. Next slide. So when you register for the exam, your fee of $205 US is going to also include 4 free score reports. You need to use, really important, you need to use those 4 free score reports before you leave the test center or before you power down from the at-home test. If you do not use those 4 free score reports, you will forfeit them. And they have a value of $27 per report. So I would highly encourage you to do your research ahead of time. Look at the institutions where you're looking to make application, look at their score requirements. Let's say if you're looking at possibly applying to 8 graduate programs and you have your top tier and let's say your lower tier, if let's say the scores you receive are maybe not top tier worthy, then you may decide to send them to your second tier or your lower tier quadrant. And again, the opposite, if they are really, really strong, you may want to send them to your top tier. How do you know what institutions are looking for? One, it may be listed on their website. Two, they may have an average score they're looking for or a range. Or you can simply contact the admissions office and ask to speak to an admissions representative and inquire what kind of a range or a score or minimum score that they're looking for. Of course, after you exit the test administration, after test day, you're always able to send additional score reports, again, for a fee of $27. And you can do that directly through your My ETS account. Next slide, please. Okay. So probably about 8 years ago, ETS instituted what's called Score Select. So as I mentioned before, years ago, you had this permanent record that followed you around for 5 years. Well, that's no longer the case. So what's nice about Score Select is you can put your best foot forward and show institutions the scores that you want them to see. So let's say, using me as an example, if I was to do no test preparation and I went into a test center, or if they at-home test without doing any prep work at all, and let's say I took the exam and I did not do well, I probably would not want to report those particular scores. Let's say I went back and I prepped for about 90 days. I went back and I took the exam for a second time and I did really, really well on my verbal section and pretty decent on my quant as well. But again, higher on the verbal. And again, the score was decent. I would send, in that particular example, I would send the most recent, because I do not want the institutions to see my first attempt because I didn't do any preparation. Let's say, using myself again as an example, I went in and I took the test for a third time and I did really, really well in the quant. And let's say my verbal was good, but my quant was higher. So in that case, I may want to use the any option. And the any option is going to allow you to choose the administrations of your choice. So I would choose administration 2 and administration 3. But again, in the test center, you have 2 options. You can choose the most recent, or you can use the all. So using myself as an example, if I took the test only 2 times, and as I mentioned in the second administration, I did well, I would want to select the most recent. Okay, now just as an FYI, some schools, especially the law schools or the JD programs, have asked to see all administrations. So they're asking you to basically be honest and select all administrations. And enough said. But again, you always have the opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, to send additional score reports at any time. And again, at that time, you also, again, have the 3 options of the most recent, all, or again, as I mentioned, any, where you would select the whole entire administration. So in that example, again, I would send administrations 2 and administrations 3. Next slide. So how do I do that? Really simple. You can memorize all the codes, but you really don't have to, because at the test center, it's going to ask you if you'd want to send your score reports. So you would select the blue button, as you see in front of you, that says add a score recipient. Next slide. Once you do that, it's going to bring up find a score recipient. And as you would see, you have to search, of course, on the country and then the state or province. Or if you know the code, you can put it in directly. Let's say I was looking again at a school in Turkey. You could see the code numbers for the particular institutions come up. And as you can see, some institutions have multiple codes. Let's say if you were applying to the Graduate School of Business, in the particular example, like in the middle, you can actually just select that and you would see 0668. And that would be the institutional code that you would select, and it would send your score report to that particular institution. Next, please. When you do that, it is going to ask you, once you select the institution, in this case, it was 7183. It's going to ask you if you want to send, because this is at the test center, it's going to ask you if you want to send all. Again, using me as an example, administrations 1 and 2. 1, I did no test preparation. 2, I studied and did really well. I would send the most recent, because I did not want to send my first admin. And you would select the most recent, and then click select. Next slide. So as I mentioned, you're going to receive your official scores in about 10 to 15 days. How are you going to know? Well, the email address that you used when you created your My ETS account, you will get an email from ETS in that particular email address that you used when registering. So we really encourage you to use an email address that you always monitor, such as maybe your Gmail account, as opposed to, let's say, an institutional account or a work address. Again, your scores again are viewable online through your account. You can print out a report of your personal, of your personal test report. You can also again report all scores in your reportable history if you need to. And as I mentioned earlier, you can send additional score reports again at any time. If you have any questions, we also have a short video that you can watch as well. And again, as I mentioned, you will have a copy of this presentation. Let's see. Institutions, please note, can also view your photograph, and they also have access to your analytical writing essays through what's called the ETS Data Manager. So please note that as well. Next slide. So what if you need to test again? Well, you have a great opportunity to test every 21 days, no more than 5 times in any 12-month rolling period. Okay, next slide. So we also have what's called, and it's ETS's best kept secret, it's what's called the free diagnostic service. And I highly encourage you, if you're taking the test more than once, to access this service because it is free. And you can access it 15 days after you take the test and up to 6 months following your test administration. What it's going to do, it's going to provide you insight on your performance in both the quantitative and the verbal reasoning section. It's going to include a description of the question types that you answered right, and more importantly, those that you answered incorrectly. And it's going to also tell you the difficulty level of each question and also how much time you spent on each of those questions. Next slide. As you can see from this screenshot, this is looking at verbal reasoning, and it's looking, in this particular screenshot, it's looking at verbal reasoning, reading comprehension, longer passage, and verbal reasoning, reading comprehension, shorter passage. Well, looking at verbal reasoning, the shorter passage, you can see I got all those questions correct. So if I was going to focus, and I was going to take the test again, I would focus my attention on reading comprehension, a longer passage, because I got 50% of the questions right, and I got 50% of the questions wrong. So that's telling me I need to concentrate more of my test preparation on that particular section. Next slide. And I think that's Catherine.
Yep.
Yes. Okay.
Well,
Take it away.
Thank you. ETS offers a number of tools that can help you get prepared for test day. So let's dive in. You can view section overviews for each measure that include general advice. You'll see sample questions as well, and you'll see explanations for those sample questions. You'll see scoring guides, as well as tips for answering questions to become familiar really with each of these different sections. The second bullet, Power Prep Test Preview tool, it contains information to help you familiarize yourself with the question types, the test features, as well as the help tools that are available during the actual GRE General Test. This can be found in your ETS account under my Test Preparation and Services link. I also encourage you to access the Power Prep online. And this is an online practice test that can be accessed in your ETS account. So definitely go through those online practice tests. The two valuable free Power Prep online practice tests can provide you with 2 simulated computer delivered test taking experiences that are really close to the actual test day experience as you're really going to get. So definitely give that a try. There is also a downloadable test prep booklet for those of you that may need to take the paper delivered GRE General Test, and those that live in regions where the paper delivered format is administered. The GRE program is also going to provide you with more free tools to help you get prepared for the GRE General Test, and that includes a GRE math review and a GRE math conventions. The GRE math review is a 100-page math refresher, and it includes things like definitions, properties, examples, and there's a set of exercises with answers at the end of each of those sections. And that's in the math review, that 100-page refresher. You'll also see links to the Khan Academy, which is really popular for people preparing for the GRE test. The GRE math conventions includes mathematical notations and symbols. There's terminology and guidelines are included. So you have access to that as well. We included a link here, so when you get a copy of this PowerPoint deck, you can just click on the links and it'll take you to all the resources that are available, and all of the ones listed here are free. But if for some reason you really want to do more, I mean, we encourage you to use the free ones first, but then there are additional materials that are available for a fee for those of you who might want some additional practice. You'll see here there's a Power Prep Plus online practice test, and that is actually 3 GRE practice books with hundreds of test questions and Score It Now. And then an online writing practice to prepare for the analytical writing measure. So let's transition and talk a little bit about what tools are available to help you stand out. So if you're in a discipline area like chemistry, math, physics, or psychology, and that's your planned major, you might want to consider taking the GRE subject test. That's different from the GRE general test. And then that allows you to actually demonstrate your abilities in a particular field, those ones on the right there. And each of those tests assumes that your undergraduate area of study or you have extensive background in that discipline before you would take those subject tests. Those are actually paper delivered and they're administered 3 times a year. If you want more information on those subject tests, we did provide a link for you here. Okay. When we were talking about registering, we mentioned the GRE search service. This is something that allows you to create a profile within the GRE search service database. And so this is where graduate programs and or business and law schools, recruiters from around the world actually will use this service to find prospective students. So it's a really great thing to do, and it's free for you. And so if you match that recruitment persona, you could receive information about their programs, their admission requirements, or even scholarships and fellowships to help you pay for your studies. And best of all, like I said, it is free for you. You can sign up when you register, like we talked about, or really at any time through your ETS account. There's also another tool called Grad School Match, and we encourage you to create a profile here as well. This is free also. And so when you do this, you can actually use all the resources here at Grad School Match, and you'll see there's a tab at the top for different resources, and there are a lot of really great resources in there, and we keep adding more, and they're really helpful for you when you're entering this phase and trying to figure out what to do and where to go. But within Grad School Match, once you create your profile, then again, similar to the search service, institutions that are looking for matches to their programs can find you. So it's a really great way for you to look in and study about different programs, but then for programs to also find you and reach out to you. Now let's take a little bit of a closer look at some additional GRE resources. This is the official GRE website, and it really houses everything that we've talked about here today. So we encourage you to take a look here. It gives you a lot of those free tools. It talks about the information, your test dates and locations, etc. Matt mentioned that GRE bulletin. I also mentioned it too. It is a great PDF. It's chock full of information. And I really encourage you to go find that and download it and take a look at it. In that bulletin, you will find information about test takers with disabilities or health-related needs. See what else here. Oh, institutions and fellowship sponsored approved to receive GRE scores, the business schools that accept GRE scores for MBA, and then the law schools that accept the GRE. So if you want to connect with other test takers that are also going through the same thing as you, we have all sorts of social channels that you can connect with and therefore engage and hear from other test takers about their plans. And so these are just a few that we have listed here. These are links to those that we've mentioned previously. And that really kind of wraps up everything that we wanted to cover today. I know we covered a lot. So if we have questions in the chat, we're more than happy to cover those now, but we're so glad that you came today and that you're deciding to take the GRE. So let me escape out of here and from sharing. And then Matt, do we want to see, did you check and see?
Yes, there's no questions came in, so
okay. Well, should we just wait for a second and see if anybody has any questions that they want to ask?
Sure.
Yeah, but otherwise, you know, like we did say, the PowerPoint and the recording will be made available to you after our session here today.
And again, just as a little plug, I always encourage graduate students, our prospective graduate students, to look in their own backyard. So at any time you have any interest in going to WKU for graduate school, talk to any of these fine folks on the call with us today, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to point you in the right direction. Also, in regarding test prep, the test preparation materials that Catherine pointed out are excellent resources. And there are free resources to help you in your step to success for graduate school. We also, because we're a nonprofit organization, we also have some additional resources for pay, and they are at a nominal price point. So if you find you need additional practice work, whether it be overall for the test or specifically related to verbal reasoning or quantitative reasoning, we have paper back books and ebooks available, in addition to Power Prep Plus Online, which is a simulation that not only provides you with scores on all three measures, but more importantly, will give you some rationale and some explanations on why you maybe got certain test questions wrong. So it's a little bit, it's more like the enhanced version of Power Prep, and that's also available. And I think, as Catherine pointed out, for Quant, the link to the Khan Academy is really, really popular with college-age students, so it's really helpful. And again, it's available to you at no cost.
It looks like Sarah asked, where will they be able to find the PowerPoint and recording? And I'm going to have to defer this to Laura or Dr. Kudali, I see joined. So, oh, thank you. Dr. Kudali actually already answered it. The graduate school will send the recording and the PowerPoint to the campus community. Hi, Dr. Kadali. Did you want to say hello? And
Well, I want to again express my gratitude to ETS. Thank you both, Ms. Catherine Schulz and Mr. Matthew Bashi Kadlubowski. We're always grateful. This is a very popular on-demand workshop with rich in information. And as Sarah asked, we will certainly share the recording, the PowerPoint with the campus community soon. So we are deeply thankful again for the service provided by ETS for no cost. It's a special exclusive to the WKU student community.
thank you, Dr. Kadali.
Always our pleasure. Well, if there's no questions, we'd like to take this opportunity to wish you the best of luck in your further graduate studies. Again, if you have any questions, you have excellent resources right on your campus. Please visit, the graduate school, and people that work in career services. I'm sure they'll be more than happy to assist you in your preparation for your future. Again, good luck. Thank you so much, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you.